Chapter 7. A Glimmer of Hope. The revelation of the design flaw sent shockwaves through the Global Space Agency. Emergency meetings were called, and the halls buzzed with a mix of anger, frustration, and despair. Elena found herself at the center of the storm, facing a barrage of questions and accusations from her colleagues. But even as the pressure mounted, she refused to buckle under the weight of their doubts. Day and night, she worked tirelessly to find a solution, poring over every scrap of data, every line of code. She reached out to experts from across the globe, seeking their input and guidance. And then, in a moment of quiet reflection, a spark of inspiration struck. Elena sat bolt upright in her chair, her eyes wide with realization. The answer had been staring them in the face all along, hidden within the very nature of the problem itself. The radiation from the antimatter engines was the key. If they could find a way to harness that energy, to use it to strengthen the hull rather than degrade it, they might just have a chance. With renewed urgency, Elena called a meeting of the project's top minds. She laid out her theory, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. At first, there was silence. The assembled experts stared at her, their expressions unreadable. And then, slowly, a murmur of conversation began to build. Questions were asked, calculations were made, and bit by bit, the pieces began to fall into place. It was a long shot, a gamble that could just as easily spell their doom as their salvation. But it was a chance, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. As the meeting adjourned, Elena felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Dr. Nakamura, her expression grave but determined. "You have taken a great risk, Dr. Petrovic," the director said, her voice low. "But perhaps, in this moment, a risk is exactly what we need." Elena nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and trepidation. "We will make this work, Dr. Nakamura. We have to." The director held her gaze for a long moment, searching for something in Elena's eyes. At last, she nodded. "Then let us begin. The clock is ticking, and humanity's fate hangs in the balance." As Elena left the meeting room, she could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders once more. But this time, it was a weight she was ready to bear. She had stared into the abyss, had faced the bitter truth of their situation, and in that darkness, she had found a spark of light. Now, it was up to her and her team to fan that spark into a flame, to build a future from the ashes of their past. The road ahead would be long and treacherous, but Elena knew that she could not falter. For the sake of all that she held dear, for the sake of the human spirit itself, she would fight on. And in that fight, she knew that she was not alone. Around her, a team of brilliant minds and determined souls stood ready to face the unknown, to brave the storm that lay ahead. Together, they would build a ship that would carry the hopes and dreams of a species across the stars. Together, they would forge a path to a new beginning. The Prometheus would rise, and with it, the future of humanity itself. Chapter 8. Against the Clock. The Global Space Agency was a hive of activity as Elena and her team raced to implement their daring new plan. Engineers and scientists worked around the clock, fueled by a potent mix of hope and desperation. The challenge before them was immense. Harnessing the radiation from the antimatter engines would require a complete overhaul of the Prometheus's power systems, not to mention the development of entirely new materials capable of withstanding the intense energy output. But Elena refused to let the scale of the task daunt her. She divided her team into specialized units, each focused on a specific aspect of the problem. She fostered a spirit of collaboration and innovation, encouraging her colleagues to think outside the box and challenge long-held assumptions. As the days turned into weeks, progress was made in fits and starts. Breakthroughs were celebrated with a fierce joy, while setbacks were met with grim determination. Through it all, Elena was a constant presence, leading by example and pushing herself to the brink of exhaustion. She subsisted on a diet of caffeine and adrenaline, her mind always racing ahead to the next challenge, the next hurdle to be overcome. But even as the technical obstacles began to fall away, a new threat emerged. Rumors began to circulate of a growing movement among the global elite, whispers of a secret cabal that sought to undermine the Prometheus project from within. At first, Elena dismissed the rumors as baseless paranoia, but as the weeks wore on, the evidence began to mount. Key personnel disappeared without explanation, vital shipments of supplies went missing, and whispered conversations in shadowed corners hinted at a web of deceit that stretched to the highest levels of power. Elena knew that she could not afford to ignore the threat. She began to investigate, calling in favors and leveraging every scrap of influence she had accumulated over the years. What she uncovered chilled her to the bone. The cabal was real, and its tentacles reached far deeper than she had ever imagined. They saw the Prometheus not as a lifeboat for humanity, but as a threat to their own power and privilege. They would stop at nothing to see the project fail, even if it meant condemning millions to a slow and agonizing death on a dying planet. Elena knew that she was fighting a war on two fronts now. She had to keep the Prometheus on track, had to push her team to achieve the impossible, but she also had to find a way to root out the cancer that threatened to destroy them all from within. It was a daunting task, one that would test her resolve and her sanity to the breaking point. But Elena had not come this far to let the dreams of a species be crushed under the heel of greed and corruption. She would fight, with every ounce of strength and every shred of wit she possessed. She would rally her allies and outmaneuver her enemies, all while racing against the clock to build a ship that could carry them to the stars. For Elena, there was no other choice. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and she would not let it fall. As she stood on the observation deck, gazing out at the skeletal form of the Prometheus taking shape in the vast hangar below, Elena felt a flicker of something that had been all too rare in recent months: hope. They were battered and bloodied, but they were not beaten. They had a plan, and they had each other, and in the end, that might just be enough to see them through the darkness and into the light of a new dawn. Chapter 9. Betrayal. As the Prometheus project entered its final stages, Elena found herself increasingly isolated. The demands of leadership and the constant pressure to stay one step ahead of her enemies had taken a toll on her relationships, both personal and professional. She spent long hours locked away in her office, poring over schematics and progress reports, trying to anticipate the next move of the cabal that sought to destroy them. Sleep became a luxury she could ill afford, and the lines of exhaustion etched themselves ever deeper into her face. But even as she pushed herself to the brink, Elena knew that she could not let her guard down for even a moment. The stakes were too high, the consequences of failure too dire. It was late one evening, as she sat hunched over her desk, that the betrayal came. The door to her office slid open, and Elena looked up, expecting to see one of her team members with an urgent report or a fresh pot of coffee. Instead, she found herself staring down the barrel of a gun. Dr. Petrov stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold determination. "I'm sorry, Elena," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "But you've left me no choice." Elena felt a surge of anger and disbelief. Petrov had been one of her most trusted colleagues, a key member of the propulsion team. She had never imagined that he could be a part of the cabal, that he could turn against her so completely. "Mikhail," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What are you doing? We're so close, we can't give up now." Petrov shook his head. "It's too late for that, Elena. The cabal has won. The Prometheus will never fly." He took a step forward, the gun never wavering. "They offered me a deal, you see. A place on the ship, a chance to start over on a new world. All I had to do was make sure that you were out of the picture." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that the cabal was ruthless, that they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. but to see one of her own turn against her, to be willing to murder her in cold blood. "You won't get away with this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The others will know. They'll stop you." Petrov laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "By the time they realize what's happened, it will be too late. The Cabal has agents everywhere, Elena. You never stood a chance." He raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. Elena closed her eyes, bracing herself for the end. But the shot never came. Instead, there was a blur of motion, a grunt of pain, and the sound of a body hitting the floor. Elena opened her eyes to see Dr. Sorensen standing over Petrov's unconscious form, a look of grim determination on his face. "Liam," she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. Sorensen nodded, his eyes never leaving Petrov's prone form. "I had a feeling something was wrong. I've been keeping an eye on him for weeks, ever since he started acting strangely." He looked up at Elena, his expression softening. "I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I wasn't sure who I could trust." Elena felt a rush of gratitude and relief. "You trusted your instincts," she said. "That's what matters." Together, they secured Petrov and sounded the alarm. The news of his betrayal sent shockwaves through the project, but it also galvanized them. They had always known that they were fighting an uphill battle, but now they knew the true face of their enemy. In the days that followed, Elena and her team redoubled their efforts. They worked harder and faster than ever before, driven by a newfound sense of purpose and unity. And as the final pieces of the Prometheus fell into place, as the mighty ship stood ready to carry them to the stars, Elena felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that almost overwhelmed her. They had done it. Against all odds, against all opposition, they had built a future for their species. And as Elena stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, gazing out at the stars that would soon be their home, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For they were more than a team now. They were a family, bound by a shared dream and an unbreakable spirit. And nothing, not even the deepest darkness of space, could stand in their way. Chapter 10. The Final Countdown. The atmosphere in the Global Space Agency was electric as the final countdown to the Prometheus's launch began. The massive ship stood on the launch pad, a gleaming testament to the ingenuity and determination of the human spirit. In the control room, Elena and her team monitored the ship's systems, their eyes glued to the screens and readouts. They had run countless simulations, checked and rechecked every component, but still, the tension was palpable. This was it, the moment of truth, the culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and struggle. As the countdown entered its final minutes, Elena allowed herself a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. The challenges they had faced, the losses they had suffered, the bonds they had forged in the crucible of adversity. She thought of Petrov, locked away in a secure facility, his treachery exposed and his plans foiled. She thought of the countless others who had worked tirelessly to make this moment possible, the unsung heroes who had toiled in obscurity to give their species a chance at survival. And she thought of the future, of the great unknown that awaited them among the stars. The Prometheus was more than just a ship, more than just a means of escape. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in the darkness. The countdown entered its final seconds, and Elena felt her heart begin to race. This was it, the moment of truth. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The roar of the engines filled the air, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The Prometheus began to rise, slowly at first, then with gathering speed, a pillar of fire and smoke ascending into the heavens. In the control room, the team erupted into cheers and applause. They had done it. The Prometheus was away, carrying the hopes and dreams of humanity into the great beyond. Elena felt a rush of emotion, a mix of relief and exhilaration and bittersweet longing. She had poured her heart and soul into this project, had sacrificed so much to see it through. And now, as she watched the ship disappear into the clear blue sky, she knew that a part of her would always be with it, would always be out there among the stars. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers they could scarcely imagine. But in that moment, as the Prometheus vanished from sight, Elena felt a sense of peace and purpose wash over her. They had done their part. They had given humanity a chance, a future beyond the confines of their dying world, and whatever lay ahead, whatever trials and triumphs awaited them, they would face them together. For they were explorers, pioneers, the vanguard of a species that had always looked to the stars with wonder and longing, and now, at last, they were on their way, ready to discover what lay beyond the next horizon. As Elena turned to her team, her eyes shining with unshed tears, she knew that this was just the beginning. The Prometheus might be gone, but its legacy would endure, a testament to the indomitable will of the human spirit. And as long as that spirit lived on, as long as there were those who dared to dream and to reach for the stars, humanity would never truly be lost. For they were the inheritors of a great legacy, the children of a species that had always looked to the future with hope and courage. And whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever darkness they might face, they would meet it head on, with the strength and resilience that had always been their birthright. The Prometheus was away, and with it, the future of humanity itself. And as Elena and her team watched it go, they knew that they had been a part of something truly great, something that would echo through the ages. For they had dared to dream, to hope, to reach for the stars, and in doing so, they had lit a fire that would never be extinguished, a beacon of light that would guide their species to a new dawn. Chapter 11. The Void. Silence, darkness, an infinite expanse of emptiness stretching out in all directions. This was the void that greeted the crew of the Prometheus as they emerged from cryosleep, their minds and bodies slowly adjusting to the new reality of their existence. For months they had slept, their consciousness suspended in a state of perfect stasis as the ship carried them across the vast distances of interstellar space. And now, as they awoke to find themselves alone in the cosmos, the true scale of their journey began to sink in. Elena was among the first to emerge from her cryopod, her eyes blinking in the dim light of the ship's interior. She felt a moment of disorientation, a sense of dislocation, as her mind struggled to process the enormity of what had happened. They had done it. They had left Earth behind, had cast themselves into the void in search of a new beginning. And now, as she looked out through the ship's viewports at the stars that surrounded them, she felt a sense of awe and wonder wash over her. But there was something else, too, a sense of unease, a feeling of isolation that crept into the corners of her mind. For all the advanced technology and careful planning that had gone into the Prometheus mission, they were still just a handful of fragile human beings, alone in the vastness of space. As the days turned into weeks, the crew of the Prometheus settled into a new routine. They tended to the ship's systems, monitored their supplies and resources, and worked to maintain the delicate balance of their artificial ecosystem. But even as they went about their daily tasks, the sense of isolation and uncertainty continued to grow. They were cut off from everything they had ever known, separated from the rest of humanity by an unimaginable gulf of time and distance. And as the weeks turned into months, the cracks began to show. Small tensions and disagreements that had once seemed trivial now took on a new significance in the claustrophobic confines of the ship. Elena did her best to maintain morale, to keep the crew focused on their mission and their ultimate goal. But even she could feel the strain, the weight of responsibility that settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. And then, just when it seemed that things could not get any worse, the unthinkable happened. It began with a small malfunction, a glitch in one of the ship's primary power systems. At first, it seemed like a minor inconvenience, something that could be easily repaired. But as the engineers dug deeper, they began to realize the true extent of the problem. The radiation shielding that protected the ship's delicate electronics had been compromised, weakened by the constant exposure to the high-energy particles that filled the void. And now, as the damage began to spread, the crew of the Prometheus found themselves facing a new and terrifying reality. They were alone, cut off from any hope of rescue or assistance, and if they could not find a way to repair the damage, to restore the ship's systems before it was too late, Elena refused to even contemplate the possibility. She threw herself into the work, pushing herself and her crew to the limits of their endurance as they fought to save their ship and their lives. But even as they worked, the sense of despair and hopelessness began to take hold. For in the face of the vast emptiness of space, in the face of the countless light years that separated them from any other living soul, what chance did they really have? As Elena looked out into the void, she felt a chill run down her spine. They were alone, adrift in an ocean of darkness, their fate resting on a knife's edge. And as the ship's systems continued to fail, as the lights began to flicker and die, she knew that they were running out of time. For in the end, the void was always waiting, ready to swallow them up and erase any trace of their existence. And in that moment, Elena felt a fear deeper than any she had ever known, a fear that threatened to consume her utterly. For in the face of the infinite, what hope did any of them really have? Chapter 12. A Flicker of Hope. The Prometheus was dying, its systems failing one by one as the damage from the radiation spread like a cancer through the ship. The crew worked around the clock, desperate to find a solution, but hope was a dwindling resource, as precious and fleeting as the air they breathed. Elena stood in the dimly lit control room, her eyes fixed on the readouts that scrolled across the screens. The ship's power levels were critical, the life support systems barely clinging to functionality. They had days, perhaps hours, before the end. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Dr. Sorensen standing beside her. His face was drawn and haggard, the weight of their situation etched into every line and shadow. "We've done all we can," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The damage is too extensive. We need to start thinking about what comes next." Elena shook her head, a spark of defiance flickering in her eyes. "No, we can't give up. Not now, not after everything we've been through." She turned back to the screens, her mind racing as she searched for a solution, a way out of the nightmare that had engulfed them. And then, in a moment of sudden clarity, she saw it. "The stasis pods," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "If we can reroute the remaining power to the cryogenic systems, we can put the crew back into hibernation." Sorensen frowned, his brow furrowing in thought. "But that would mean—" "I know," Elena said, cutting him off. "It would mean that someone would have to stay awake, to monitor the systems and keep the ship running." She took a deep breath, the weight of her decision settling onto her shoulders like a physical burden. "I'll do it. I'll stay awake." Sorensen opened his mouth to protest, but Elena silenced him with a look. "It's the only way," she said, her voice firm and unyielding. "We can't all survive, but some of us can, and I'm the best chance we have of making sure that happens." In the end, there was no argument, no debate. The crew of the Prometheus prepared for their final journey, their bodies and minds surrendering to the oblivion of cryosleep. Elena stood alone in the silent ship, the weight of her solitude pressing down on her like a physical force. She moved through the empty corridors, her footsteps echoing in the stillness, the only sound in a universe of infinite quiet. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Elena watched as the ship's systems slowly failed, as the reserves of power and resources dwindled away to nothing. She fought against the despair that threatened to consume her, focusing all her energy on keeping the ship and its precious cargo alive. But even as she worked, she could feel the toll that the isolation was taking on her mind and body. She began to see things, to hear voices in the silence of the ship, the ghosts of the past, the specters of the future, all blurring together in a kaleidoscope of madness and despair. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, a miracle happened. It began with a faint signal, a whisper of electromagnetic radiation that stirred the ship's dormant sensors. Elena watched in disbelief as the signal grew stronger, as the readings began to coalesce into a pattern, a message from the depths of space. It was a distress beacon, a cry for help from a ship that had been lost long before the Prometheus had ever left Earth. A ship that had been searching for a new home, a new beginning, just like them. Elena felt a surge of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness that had engulfed her for so long. She set a course for the beacon, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. And as the Prometheus drew closer, as the signal grew stronger and clearer, Elena knew that they had found something extraordinary, something that would change the course of their journey forever. For in the vastness of space, in the infinite expanse of the cosmos, they were not alone. And as long as there was life, as long as there was hope, the human spirit would endure, would find a way to survive and thrive in the face of any challenge, any obstacle. The Prometheus had been given a second chance, a new lease on life. And as Elena stood on the threshold of a new future, she knew that she would do whatever it took to make sure that they made the most of it. For in the end, that was all any of them could do, to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to keep reaching for the stars, no matter how dark the night might seem. And as the Prometheus sailed on into the unknown, Elena knew that they would never stop searching, never stop dreaming of a better tomorrow. For that was the true legacy of the human spirit, the unquenchable fire that burned within them all. And as long as that fire continued to blaze, as long as there were those who dared to hope and dream and reach for the impossible, the story of the Prometheus would never truly end. It would go on, a beacon of light in the darkness, a testament to the courage and resilience of the human spirit. And in the end, that was all that mattered, all that would ever matter in the face of the infinite.